My husband of 22 years didn't ask for a divorce. He asked for polyamory. He said it was progressive, an evolution of our trust. But it was just a marketing budget for his midlife crisis. While I was trying to be open, he was busy forging my name, liquidating our $400,000 investment account, and planning his escape. He thought he was a poet. He forgot I was a forensic accountant. In our circle, dinner parties were a competitive sport, and our Portland home was the Star Stadium. It was all glass and cedar and minimalist furniture that looked uncomfortable, but cost a fortune. That night, the air smelled of rain and the cedar plank salmon Mark had insisted on grilling, even in the light October drizzle. "The point is," Mark said, his voice carrying over the curated jazz, "is that these artisans in Peru, they're not just making things. They're curating a lifestyle. We're just the vessel." He held his Pinot Noir, swirling it so the light from the track light caught the deep red. He was 50, but he had the restless energy of a 25-year-old, all lean muscle from yoga and a carefully curated wardrobe of ethical linen. Our friends, all successful, all progressive, nodded like he was sharing gospel. I was the stage manager to his one-man show. I was the one who made sure the wine was breathing, that the gluten-free guest had her own dessert, and that the conversation never veered toward anything truly uncomfortable. At 48, I was a partner at one of the top forensic accounting firms in the city. My life was built on logic, on numbers that had to add up. Mark's life and his small, perpetually unprofitable import business was built on narrative. "Eliza, this salmon is divine," our friend David said, raising his glass to me. I smiled. "The cedar plank does all the work." "Nonsense," Mark said, sliding his arm around my waist, a familiar gesture of public ownership. "Eliza could make a tire taste good. She's the technician. I'm just the poet," everyone laughed. I smiled, but the squeeze on my waist felt more like a correction than affection. Later, after the last guest had grabbed their artisanal, hand-woven scarf from the coat rack, the house settled into its usual state, cavernous, silent, and clean. The dishwasher hummed its steady rhythm. I was wiping down the quartz countertop. Mark never wiped when he came up behind me. "He didn't touch me this time." "That went well," he said. He was still buzzing from the performance. It always does. I rinsed the cloth, the smell of bleach sharp and clean against the lingering scent of salmon. "Eliza." I turned. He wasn't looking at me, but at his own reflection in the dark floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the wet, empty yard. "I've been doing a lot of reading," he started. Oh God. This was how it always began. The yoga retreat, the silent meditation, the brief, disastrous attempt at veganism. It always meant a new, expensive disruption. About what? About us. About connection, about honesty. I waited. I'd been balancing a hostile takeover audit for a tech firm all week. I was tired. "We've been together 22 years, he said, finally turning to me. His eyes were bright, earnest. It was the look he used when he was about to overdraw the business account. "It's comfortable. We're a great team. But the spark, the energy, it's not what it was." I crossed my arms. "We're not 25, Mark. No, that's just it." He stepped closer, animated. "That's the trap. People think monogamy is the only path, that it's the end goal. But what if it's just one way? What if there's a way to evolve, to re-energize our lives, our connection, without the dishonesty, without the sneaking around?" A cold, precise dread settled in my stomach. It was the feeling I got right before I found the cooked books. "What are you talking about?" "Polyamory." He said the word like a benediction, like a gift he was offering me. He wasn't confessing to an affair, I realized. He was presenting a business plan. "Eliza, think about it. Radical honesty. No secrets. We could bring new energy into our lives, and it would all be open. It would make us stronger. We're better than that, Eliza. We're stronger than monogamy." He was talking about our marriage like it was a sluggish stock he wanted to divest. I stared at him, at the man I had slept next to for more than 2 decades. I saw the logic, the clean, selfish lines of it. He wanted to cheat, but he wanted a hall pass signed by me, notarized by our progressive ideals. So you've met someone, I said. It wasn't a question. He had the grace to almost blush. It's not like that. It's not about one person. It's a concept. I met someone at the wellness retreat, yes. We talked. She's very evolved. She's the one who gave me the books. But this isn't about her. This is about us. About not letting our marriage calcify. Calcify. The word was so clinical. So, him. I'm going to bed, I said. My voice was flat. Eliza, just think about it. Don't just shut it down because it's new. I need to lock up. He hesitated, the charismatic salesman sensing he'd lost the room. Okay, just think about it. He kissed my forehead, a dry proprietary peck, and headed upstairs. I heard his footsteps on the bamboo flooring. I stood alone in the dark kitchen, the hum of the dishwasher the only sound. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. I was 48 years old, a partner at my firm, a woman who could find a single fraudulent cent in a mountain of data, who could trace a ghost asset through 6 shell companies. My husband had just presented me with an emotional Trojan horse. I could see the wheels, I could see the seams. The only thing I couldn't see, not yet, was what was hidden inside. A midlife crisis with a marketing budget. My best friend Sarah stirred her latte, the tiny spoon clinking aggressively against the ceramic. We were at our usual downtown coffee shop, a dark, wood-paneled place that smelled like burnt beans and old books. It was the antithesis of Mark's airy, minimalist aesthetic. It was my place. He called it an evolution, I said, picking at the foam on my cappuccino. Of course he did. A fair is so last season. Sarah leaned forward, her sharp legal mind. She was a divorce attorney, naturally, slicing through the bullshit. Eliza, you're the most logical person I know. You audit thieves for a living. You cannot possibly be buying this. I'm not buying it. I sighed, the warmth from the mug doing nothing to thaw the knot in my stomach. 22 years, Sarah. He says he wants honesty. Maybe this is just his clumsy, idiotic way of, I don't know, trying. He's not trying. He's shopping. And he wants you to hold his bags. She pointed the tiny spoon at me. Do not agree to this. This is not a negotiation. This is a hostage situation where you're the only one in the room. But I went home, and I found Mark in his home office, which I'd paid to remodel, reading one of the books his new friend had given him. The cover had a stylized lotus blossom. We need to talk, I said, standing in the doorway. He looked up, all performative openness. Great, I'm glad you're ready. I'm not ready, I'm processing. You ambushed me, Mark. An ambush is a secret attack, Eliza. This is the opposite. This is radical, total honesty. We argued for an hour. It was like auditing a ghost. He didn't defend, he reframed. He didn't attack, he observed. Finally, he deployed the weapon he'd been saving. You know, I'm disappointed, he said, his voice quiet, dripping with manufactured sorrow. I always thought you were different. More open-minded, not so conventional. He hit the bullseye, my one great insecurity. The analytical, precise accountant. The technician, not the poet. The one who wasn't cool. He was saying I was the one calcifying. Fine, I snapped. The word was out before I could stop it. He brightened. Fine, we will talk about it. But there are rules, ground rules. I started ticking them off on my fingers. 1, we go to therapy, together, before anything happens. 2, full transparency. I get veto power. 3, no secrets, no surprises. You want honesty, you give it. Absolutely, yes. That's all I've ever wanted. He smiled, a brilliant, blinding smile that hadn't been aimed at me in years. He agreed far too quickly. He'd already broken the rules, all of them. 3 days later, he announced, Chloe and I are getting coffee on Thursday. I'd love for you to come. It's all open. Not, I'd like to see Chloe. It was already a done deal. My veto power was a puff of smoke. The cafe was one of those aggressively cheerful places that smelled like wheatgrass and sandalwood. It was packed with young, beautiful people in expensive yoga clothes, tapping at laptops. Chloe was 29. She glowed. She had a tiny silver stud in her nose, a cascade of sun-bleached hair, and a stack of mala beads on her wrist. She was wearing a white tank top that showed off the intricate yoga pose tattooed on her shoulder blade. She hugged me. A full, lingering, sandalwood-scented hug, Eliza. It is so amazing to finally meet you. I mean, Mark's energy is just incredible, and I'm so honored to be part of this journey you're both on. I ordered a black coffee. She and Mark had matching mugs of steaming green tea. For 20 minutes, she talked about energetic alignment and holding space. She treated me with a gentle, suffocating pity. I wasn't a wife, I was an incumbent. It must be so hard, letting go of those old constructs, she said, placing her warm hand on my arm. My skin crawled. Mark is he's so evolved. He's ready to move past the possessiveness that our parents' generation was stuck in. You're so strong to be doing this work with him. I was the one doing the work. He was the one who was evolved. I was a relic. She was the future. I looked at Mark. He was beaming at her, soaking in the validation. He was an incredible energy. I was a construct. I sat there, the forensic accountant, the rational one, and I just disassociated. I watched them. I noted the way his knee angled toward hers under the table. I noted the way she touched his forearm when she laughed. I was auditing the affair he was having right in front of my face, and just like that, the experiment was live. My rules were a joke. There was no therapy. There was no talking. Mark was just gone. He spent every night at Chloe's wellness studio. He insisted he was being honest. He'd text me, at Chloe's, holding space. When he was home, he was a stranger. He'd look at my work clothes, the silk blouses and tailored slacks I'd worn for 20 years, and frown. You should really wear more natural fibers, Eliza. All that polyester, it traps your aura. This is silk. It's so constricted. He was using her words. He was painting me in 50 Shades of Grey, the dull, conventional wife who couldn't evolve. He was building his case. He needed me to be the prison so he could be the escapee. I realized I'd been played. This wasn't polyamory. This was a hostile takeover, and I'd just been reframed out of my own company. The realization came to a head on a Tuesday. I was in Seattle, finishing a grueling 3-week audit of a shipping conglomerate. I'd been living in a sterile Marriott, surviving on bad room service and the thrill of the hunt. And I found it. The ghost account, the diverted funds, the whole multi-million-dollar shell game. I nailed them. I closed my laptop, the victory a clean, cold fire in my veins. I was good at my job. I was precise, and I was done being a fool. I flew home that night, a day early. I rehearsed the speech in the Uber. The experiment is over, Mark. It was a lie. You can have Chloe, but you're not keeping me. I want you out. I paid the driver and pulled my roller bag up the stone walkway. The house was dark, no lights on. His car wasn't in the driveway, but that wasn't unusual. I unlocked the front door. The air was still, cold. It didn't feel like my house. There was no lingering scent of his coffee, no sound of his music. Mark? The silence that answered was absolute. I dropped my bag in the foyer. The echo was wrong. I walked into the living room. His expensive Danish reading chair and ottoman were gone. The bookshelf next to it, cleared. I ran to his office. The desk was there, but the laptop was gone. The hard drives were gone. The Lotus Blossom books were gone. I went upstairs to our bedroom. My side was untouched. His side was sterile. The closet was empty. Just a few wire hangers left behind. I walked into the bathroom. His razor, his electric toothbrush, his ridiculously expensive, ethically sourced face oils, all gone. He hadn't just left. He had purged. I pulled out my phone. I called him. The call didn't ring. It went straight to the electronic void. The number you have dialed is not in service. Not to voicemail. Not in service. He'd changed his number. I opened our text thread. My last message landed in Seattle. Talk tomorrow. From 3 weeks ago was a stark blue. I typed, Mark, where are you? I hit send. The green bubble popped up immediately. Not delivered. He'd blocked me. He'd blocked his wife of 22 years. I stood in the silent, empty bedroom, the smell of my own perfume suddenly choking. He hadn't just left me. He had vanished. He had ghosted me. I backed out of the room, my hand finding the wall. I felt the cold, hard plaster against my palm. I slid down, my legs giving out, and sat on the hallway floor, the screen of my phone still glowing with that sickening green bubble. The phone felt impossibly heavy. My thumb hovered over Sarah's name. Calling her would make it real. It would mean saying the words out loud, and I wasn't sure I could form them. The silence of the house was so complete it was ringing. I finally pressed the screen. It rang once, twice. Eliza? It's late. You back from Seattle? Her voice was brisk, already half distracted. He's gone, Sarah. The words came out in a choked gasp. It sounded like someone else was speaking, a pause. The distraction in her voice snapped to attention. What do you mean, gone? Like gone for a drive? No, gone. His clothes. His face oil. His reading chair. I was babbling, listing the household items like an insurance adjuster. He's gone. Okay, that bastard finally did it. He left you for the yoga instructor. Good riddance, Eli. He blocked me. I cut her off, the words tearing my throat. I called him and it's not in service. I texted. Not delivered. After 22 years, Sarah, he just deleted me. Like I'm spam. The tears came then, hot and humiliating. I was crying over a man who used the word calcify. I was crying because his chair was gone. I felt stupid. I felt, for the first time in my professional life, like the world's biggest fool. He played me, I whispered, sliding down the wall in the hallway, the polished bamboo cold against my back. He got me to agree to that concept, and it was all just, it was a cover, a marketing budget. You were right. God, you were right. Eliza. Sarah's voice was sharp. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't sympathetic. It was the voice she used in depositions. Stop crying. I don't give a damn about his chair, and I don't care about his face oil. What about the accounts? Have you checked the bank accounts? The question cut through the panic like an ice pick. It was a command. A task. It was data. No, I said, my breath catching. I just got home. Hang up this phone and check the bank accounts. Log in, now, then call me back. The line clicked. My legs were shaking, but I stood up. I walked past the empty space where his chair used to be and into my home office. Not his, with its lotus books and meditation cushions. Mine, the one with the secure server, the locked file cabinets, and the 3 monitors. I sat in my high-backed leather chair. My fingers, usually so fast on the keyboard, fumbled. Password. I typed. Access denied. My heart stopped. He'd locked me out. No, wait. I typed it wrong. I was shaking. I entered it again, slowly. Click. The main joint checking account loaded. The balance was 5,1422s. He'd left me grocery money. The arrogance of it, the pitying, condescending insult, made me nauseous. I looked at the transaction history. A single wire transfer in for exactly $5,000 dated yesterday. From an account I didn't recognize. He was allowing me this. Okay, I breathed, my voice trembling. Okay, that's... okay. But the checking account wasn't the real money. The real money was the investment portfolio. The one built on my bonuses. The one I'd set up 15 years ago. The one I called our Albatross Fund. The heavy weight we'd carry to freedom in retirement. I opened a new tab. I logged into the brokerage. The page loaded. The dashboard. The bright, optimistic graphs showing our projected growth. Except the graph was gone. In its place was a flat line hovering just above the bottom of the axis. My eyes shot to the main number. The one in bold green type, total portfolio value, 117.34i, didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stopped. The air in my lungs turned to glass. No, I clicked on account activity. My hand was steady now. The tremor was gone. The list populated the screen. October 14th, sale of 500 units, VTI, $102,000, October 14th. Wire transfer, outgoing, $102,000, October 17. Sale of 200 units, VXS, 60-40-200 gears, October 17. Wire transfer, outgoing, $64,200, October 19th. Sale of 800 units, BND, $88,000, October 19th. Wire transfer, outgoing, $88,000, or page after page, date after date. He'd done it systematically. He'd started the day I left for Seattle. The entire 3 weeks I was gone. The entire time I was buried in that shipping conglomerate's fraudulent books. He was here clicking sell, transfer, transfer, $412,000. $800, gone. The humiliation didn't curdle. It flash froze. The panic vanished, sucked into a vacuum. All that was left was a cold, pure, diamond-hard rage. He hadn't just used my trust as a cover. He'd used my work. He'd waited until I was consumed, until I was distracted by the one thing I was better at than he was, and he'd gutted me. I picked up the phone. I didn't call Sarah. I logged into my secure work terminal. I opened the file on the Seattle audit, the one I'd just closed, the one where I'd tracked a ghost asset through 6 shell companies. I went back to the bank statement. I looked at the final wire transfer, the destination account. It wasn't a name. It was just a string of numbers. An LLC.CHL Wellness Holdings LLC. I typed the name into the state business registry search. Registered agent, Mark Turner. Date of incorporation, 6 months ago. The blood in my veins felt like ice water. He hadn't just planned this for weeks. He'd been planning this for half a year. I stared at the screen, at the name of his shell corporation. He was a poet, all right, and I was the technician, and I was the only one who could find him. For 3 days, I didn't leave the house. I didn't answer the door. I let Sarah's calls go to voicemail. The silence of the empty rooms was a physical weight, a constant reminder of the space Mark had occupied and then evacuated, like a hermit crab ditching a shell. But I wasn't in the house. I was in my office. The humiliation and panic had burned away, leaving behind the clean, cold engine of my profession. I was a ghost in my own life, but in this room I was a hunter. I didn't call the police. This wasn't a missing person. I didn't call a divorce lawyer. This wasn't a broken heart. This was a financial crime. This was a hostile takeover. And I was conducting the audit. I slept on the cot I kept in the closet for all-nighters, waking every 3 hours. I drank black coffee until my teeth ached and ate dry crackers from a box. My world shrank to the glow of my 3 monitors. On the left screen, I had the CHL Wellness Holdings, LLC registration. On the right, I had the full statements from our joint investment account. In the center, I had a complex mind map of wire transfers, dates, and institutions. He'd been sloppy. The rage made him sloppy. The $412,800 was the seed money. It landed in his new shell account at a regional bank in Delaware, a state he'd clearly chosen for its corporate privacy laws, a classic amateur move. He thought that was enough. He thought I'd see the money was gone and just give up. Call a lawyer, cry. He forgot what I do for a living. I watched the money move. A few days after the final transfer, a new transaction appeared. A wire into the LLC for $650,000. My fingers flew across the keyboard. It was a loan, a commercial mortgage. Mark, the poet, the man who couldn't balance his own import business checkbook, had secured a $650,000 loan. I ran a UCC search on CHL Wellness Holdings, LLC. The loan was secured by a single asset. I clicked the link to the county clerk's database, a property, a deed, address, 114 Paseo del Norte, Taos, New Mexico. I opened a new tab and typed in the address. A defunct real estate listing popped up. A rambling 10-room adobe compound, listed as a former B&B. The pictures showed cracked terracotta tiles, overgrown gardens, and a faded wooden sign that read, the Turquoise Bear Inn. The asking price was $975,000. My $412,000 was the down payment. The $650,000 loan covered the rest, and I assumed the renovations. He and Chloe, they weren't just running away. They were upgrading. They were building their spiritual wellness B&B, their high-end yoga retreat, on a foundation of my life's work. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it. He thought he was so smart. He'd used the LLC. He'd used a different state. But a new LLC with no assets and no credit history doesn't get a $650,000 loan on its own. The bank would have demanded a personal guarantee. They would have demanded that the partners, the owners of the LLC, personally back the loan with their own credit. I dug into the loan file, pulling the public-facing documents from the bank's portal. The application, the terms, and finally, the personal guarantee addendum. There was Mark's looping, arrogant signature. Mark C. Turner, President, CHL Wellness Holdings, and right below it, another signature, Eliza M. Turner, Partner. I stopped breathing. My hand froze on the mouse. It was my signature, my exact signature, the precise, controlled script I used on legal documents, the one I'd signed on our original Portland mortgage 22 years ago. He hadn't even tried to fake it. He'd scanned it. I leaned in, zooming 400%. I could see the pixels. The edges were too clean. It was a digital lift. A clean, simple, copy and paste job. He had forged my name on a federal loan application. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This wasn't theft from a joint account, which DAs were loath to prosecute. This was bank fraud, wire fraud, a federal, white-collar crime carrying a penalty of up to 30 years. I stared at the screen, at my own name, weaponized against me. He was so desperate to get his money, so certain of my ignorance, that he'd crossed the one line I could exploit. The coldness in my chest bloomed. It wasn't anger anymore, it was certainty. He hadn't just left me a trail of breadcrumbs. He'd left me a noose. I picked up the phone. I didn't call the U.S. attorney, not yet. I didn't call the bank, not yet. I called Sarah. I know where he is, I said, my voice flat, devoid of any tears. And I know what he did. What? How, Eliza, are you okay? He's in Taos. He bought a B&B. He bought a... She was speechless. He took out a loan, Sarah, on top of the money he stole. A commercial loan for $650,000. I paused, letting the silence stretch, savoring the next words. And to get it, he forged my signature on the application. The line was dead quiet. I heard Sarah, the toughest divorce attorney in Portland, let out a slow, sharp whistle. "Oh, that magnificent, stupid bastard," she whispered. "Eliza, he just handed you his entire life in a box." "Yes, he did," I said, clicking print. The printer whirred to life, spitting out the fraudulent document. "And I'm going to mail it back to him, in pieces." I printed the forged signature and pinned it to the corkboard above my monitors. It was my new North Star. My house was a morgue. The silence was absolute. I'd unplugged the landline. My cell phone sat on the corner of the desk, dark and quiet. I'd emailed my partners at the firm, telling them I had a severe family emergency and was taking an indefinite leave of absence. It was the first lie I'd ever told them, but the shame was the worst part. It was a low, constant thrum beneath my ribs. It wasn't the shame of a wife who'd been left. It was the shame of a professional. I was a bloodhound who had let a fox raid her own chicken coop. I had been arrogant, complacent, and distracted. Mark hadn't just counted on my trust. He'd counted on my ambition, knowing my work would consume me. That professional embarrassment was a more potent fuel than grief. Grief makes you sloppy. This made me precise. My revenge would not be a messy, emotional confrontation. It would be a quiet, systematic, and fully documented audit. I went to work. Mark and Chloe had a business, CHL Wellness Holdings, LLC, and that business had a public-facing component. I found Chloe's Instagram. It was exactly what I expected. A sea of oversaturated sunsets, artful shots of avocado toast, and videos of her flowing through yoga poses, all set to a soundtrack of soft, chiming music. Her bio read, Healer, Seeker, co-founder of the Turquoise Bear Collective, manifesting our sacred space in the high desert. She'd already posted a dozen before shots of the B&B. Her, in a pristine white linen jumpsuit and a hard hat, pointing at a crumbling adobe wall. Her and Mark, clinking matcha lattes on the cracked patio, his arms slung around her. The caption, "So blessed to be on this journey with my soul partner." They weren't just building a business. They were building a brand. They were monetizing my money, and brands need investment. I opened a new, secure browser. I created a new identity. It took me less than an hour. I bought a burner phone with a San Francisco area code. I created a sterile professional email address. I built a placeholder website for a venture capital firm, A. Thorne Ventures. The site was all gray tones and corporate speak. Strategic capital for emerging lifestyle markets. Alex Thorne, gender neutral, powerful, bored. Then, I made an Instagram account for A. Thorne Ventures. I kept it private, with a simple gray logo for an icon. I followed exactly 50 accounts. Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, Condé Nast Traveler, and a dozen high-end boutique hotel chains in places like Marfa, Scottsdale, and Joshua Tree. And then I followed Chloe. I waited. It took exactly 4 minutes for her to approve the request and follow me back. Of course she did. She was hunting for validation, for an audience. I let the follow sit for a day. I let her see my name in her notifications. Let her click the link to the VC website. Let her wonder. Then I went back to her feed. I liked 3 photos. Not the yoga poses. Not the matcha lattes. I liked the photo of the crumbling wall. I liked the architectural mood board she'd posted. And I liked a boomerang of her and Mark holding a set of blueprints captioned, "The vision is becoming a reality." I closed the app. The bait was set. Now, for Mark. His vulnerability wasn't ego. It was finance. He was an amateur swimming in a professional shark tank. He'd committed a federal crime, and he'd left a paper trail a mile wide. I opened a new encrypted email client. I created a new untraceable address. I began to compose a message. It was not addressed to Mark. It was addressed to the anonymous tip portal of the Internal Revenue Service. I was not an angry wife. I was a concerned citizen, a whistleblower with an intimate knowledge of financial structuring. I didn't make accusations. I simply organized the data. To the Office of Whistleblower Information, I wish to report suspicious and potentially fraudulent activity concerning CHL Wellness Holdings, LLC, Delaware. The LLC received a non-capital gains-related wire transfer of $412,800 mo. I laid it all out. The transfer of my investment funds, which I framed as a massive, undeclared gift from a third party, flagging it for gift tax evasion. This transfer was immediately leveraged to secure a commercial loan, $650,000, from First Regional Bank of New Mexico. I pointed to the irregular nature of the loan, given to a brand new LLC with no operating history. I suggested they examine the personal guarantees on the loan, as they were likely the source of the fraud. I attached the public-facing loan documents, but not the signature page. I would hold that back. That was my leverage. The LLC's president, Mark C. Turner, has a history of failed, tax-delinquent businesses in Oregon. I attached the public records of his 2 previous failed, ethically sourced businesses, both of which had outstanding state tax liens. I packaged his entire financial life, his past failures, his current fraud, into one neat, undeniable, and utterly damning file. I knew what this would do. An audit was a certainty. They would freeze the LLC's accounts. They would put a lien on the Taos property. The renovation would stop. The money would stop. The life he'd stolen from me would grind to a halt. I reread the email. It was precise. It was cold. It was, in its own way, a work of art. I hit send out a quiet whoosh as the email left the outbox. The first trap was sprung. My phone buzzed. A new notification. It wasn't Sarah. It was Instagram. A new direct message. From Chloe. Hi, Alex. Saw you followed us. So exciting. We're deep in the renovation right now, but would love to connect about our vision for the Turquoise Bear Collective. Let me know if you're ever in the Taos area. I stared at the message. She was already fishing. She was already looking past Mark, toward the next bigger thing. I had him. I had her. I had the IRS and the bank. I had all the pieces, all the data, all spread out on my 3 monitors in Portland. But it wasn't enough. I looked at the picture on her feed, the one of her and Mark clinking their green mugs. They looked so happy, so blessed. I couldn't just watch this on a screen. I couldn't just audit the collapse from 1,000 miles away. A good auditor always verifies the assets in person. I needed to see the cracks. I needed to be there when the first one appeared. I opened a new browser tab and typed in flights to Albuquerque. The air in Albuquerque was thin and sharp, smelling of dust and something herbal I couldn't place. Sage, maybe. It was a sterile kind of dry, a stark contrast to the damp, mossy scent of Portland. My skin felt tight. I rented a gray, anonymous sedan, the kind that disappears in a parking lot, and drove the 2 hours north to Taos. The sky was an impossibly deep, bruised blue. The high desert landscape was all muted browns and pale greens, beautiful and harsh. It was a place with no patience for bullshit. I didn't go to a hotel. I checked into a generic motel on the outskirts of town, one of those chains with plastic ice buckets and paper-thin walls. I paid in cash. I sat on the stiff polyester blend comforter and pulled out my burner phone. I opened Chloe's Instagram. She'd been quiet for 2 days. No blissful yoga poses. No updates on the sacred space. The IRS had been fast. It was time to see my audit in person. The address was easy to find. The Turquoise Bear Inn. It was set back from a winding, dusty road, half hidden by overgrown chamisa and old cottonwood trees. I parked my rental across the street, far enough down to be just another car, but close enough to see the front patio. It was a beautiful, sprawling adobe compound, and it was a complete disaster. Half the roof was missing. Piles of raw lumber sat in the drive, next to a stack of drywall that was already warping in the sun. A cement mixer sat idle, a bag of hardened mix ripped open beside it. There were no trucks, no workers, just silence and the whistle of the high desert wind. My IRS tip had landed. The accounts were frozen. The renovation had hit a brick wall. I sat there for an hour, the engine off, the heat building inside the car. The sun was relentless. Finally, a beat-up Subaru Forester, his car, pulled into the driveway, spitting gravel. Mark got out at the driver's side. He looked smaller. The poet's linen shirt was rumpled and streaked with sweat. His hair was flat. He slammed the car door and stared at the silent, dead construction site, his hands on his hips. Chloe got out of the passenger side. She wasn't wearing white linen. She was in leggings and a sports bra, her hair piled in a messy bun. She was holding her phone. They began to argue. I was too far away to hear the words, but the body language was universal. Mark was pacing, gesturing wildly at the half-finished roof. He looked panicked, his movements jerky and desperate. Chloe was rigid. She held her phone up as if it were a shield and shook her head. He was blaming the bank, the contractors, the town. He was blaming everyone but himself. Chloe was not having it. She was ambitious. She wasn't here to be the supportive girlfriend to a failed visionary. She was here to be the co-founder of a high-end brand. And the brand was failing. I saw the cracks. They were wide enough to drive a truck through. It was time to apply the pressure. I picked up my burner phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I opened Instagram, went to my Athorn Ventures account, and opened the DM thread with Chloe. I typed, "Chloe, thanks for the invite. I had my team do some preliminary due diligence. I'm concerned, worried, frankly, about your partner's legal issues. His finances look messy, and I see a history of failed businesses and tax liens tied to his name." I let that sit for a beat. I watched her. She was still arguing with Mark, jabbing her finger toward the Subaru. I typed the rest. I don't invest in messy operations. The turquoise bear concept has potential, but only if it's clean. If you want to move forward with a potential investment from me, you should be the sole proprietor. I only invest in clean operations. I hit send. I watched her. She was turning away from Mark, walking back toward the car when her phone buzzed in her hand. I saw her stop. I saw her look down. She stood frozen for a full 30 seconds. Her back to Mark. He was still ranting at the lumber. Not even noticing she'd disengaged. She read the message once, twice. I watched her shoulders straighten. The yoga healer vanished. The businesswoman emerged. She turned around, her face a mask of calculation, and walked back to Mark. She didn't yell. She held the phone up for him to see. Mark stopped pacing. He squinted at the screen. He snatched the phone from her hand. He read the message. I saw the blood drain from his face, even from 50 yards away. He looked at the phone, then at Chloe, then back at the phone. It was a look of pure, unadulterated betrayal. His investor, his backup plan, and she was already cutting him out. He started yelling. This time I could almost hear the raw panic in the sound. He grabbed her arm. She ripped it away. She was pointing at the house, then at him. He was shaking his head over and over, his face crumbling. This was not the charismatic man from the dinner party. This was a cornered, terrified animal. Chloe turned, her ponytail whipping through the air, and got back in the passenger seat. She slammed the door so hard I heard the muffled thump. Mark stood there, vibrating with rage and fear. He looked at the house, at the frozen cement mixer, at the silent phone in his hand. He looked like a man who had just realized the lifeboat he was on had a hole, and his partner was holding the only life vest. He got back in the car. The Subaru tore out of the driveway, spitting more gravel, and sped off in the opposite direction of town. I sat in the quiet, hot rental car. I hadn't made a sound. The squeeze was working. The messy finances and legal issues I'd warned her about were, of course, the very ones I had manufactured. I had just handed Chloe the knife. I had just given her the logical, financial why for betraying him, and I knew, with the cold certainty of a balanced ledger, that she was going to use it. I flew back to Portland the next day. The sterile, damp air of my empty house was a relief. The high desert was too bright. It exposed everything. I preferred the shadows. I sat in my office, the forged signature still pinned to my board. My trip to Taos had confirmed the data. The cracks were real. The foundation was unsound. The A. Thorn DM was the first tremor. The IRS freeze was the second. Now it was time for the aftershock. Chloe was a businesswoman, not a martyr. She wouldn't go down with a sinking ship, but she needed one final, undeniable push. She needed to know that messy wasn't a temporary problem. It was a contagion. I opened my anonymous email client, the one I'd used on the IRS. I created a new identity, a new burner address. This one was simpler, taos.local.info.go. I found the public-facing info email on the Turquoise Bear Collective's broken website. Subject, IRS Lion, urgent to the owners. I am a local contractor. I was about to bid on your drywall work. I always run a public records check on new clients. A federal tax lien was filed against CHL Wellness Holdings, LLC, yesterday. I've seen this before. Your accounts are frozen. The asset, the B&B, is locked. This isn't a simple audit. It's a full seizure. Whoever this Mark Turner is, he's brought a world of trouble. As a courtesy, I'm letting you know. If you have any personal funds commingled with his, I'd separate them. Immediately. Good luck. You're going to need it. I hit send, then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. During my initial audit of Mark's finances, I found all his accounts. He'd been lazy. When he'd set up the CHL Wellness business account in Taos, he'd also opened a new joint personal checking account at the same bank. He'd funded it with $20,000, the last crumbs of my liquidated portfolio, his walking around money. I still had the login. He'd used our old Portland anniversary as the password. The arrogance, the sentimentality. He was at his core a fool. I logged in. I didn't touch anything. I just watched. For a day, nothing. The balance sat at $1,950.33. Then, at 9:02 p.m. on a Thursday night, the activity started. I was sitting in the dark, my face lit only by the monitor's glow, a cold mug of coffee at my elbow. 2 p.m. Zelle payment to Chloe Stevens, 2,500 arns. Transaction limit. My heart didn't pound. It just ticked. 03 p.m. Zelle payment to Chloe Stevens, $2,500. Transaction limit, daily max reached. She was testing the limits, seeing how fast she could pull the cash. 05 p.m. Venmo payment to a Chloe Wellness, $2,999.999. Transaction limit. I imagined the scene in Taos. The screaming. Mark, cornered and begging, realizing his soul partner was not just leaving, but robbing him. He'd shown her exactly how it was done. 10 p.m. Online transfer to ACT. 772, $10,000. That was it. The big one. She'd linked her own private bank account and pulled the cord. A few minutes passed. A new set of transactions. 18 p.m. Debit purchase. Chevron 449. Taos. NM 7814. She was filling her tank. 24 p.m. Debit purchase. Southwest Com 319-0. A one-way ticket. She wasn't just driving. She was flying. The car was probably in her name, too. 3 p.m. ATM withdrawal. Taos. Bancorp. $1,000. Ours. The maximum. Her pocket money for the airport. I watched the account balance dwindle in real time. $19,450. $16,950. $11,950. $9,000. Sub $900. $1,500. When the dust settled, the remaining balance was $42.20. She hadn't just left him. She'd gutted him. She'd treated him as a bad investment and liquidated his assets for cash. It was the most beautiful, logical, and ruthless thing I had ever seen. She was the evolved one, all right. I sat back in my chair, the silence of my office a perfect cold void. I closed the browser. My work was done. The trap was sprung. The bait was taken. The second rat had eaten the first. My phone, which had been dark for weeks, suddenly lit up on the desk. I didn't recognize the number, but I recognized the area code. 575 at Taos, New Mexico. He was alone. He was in a half-finished, foreclosed building. He had no girlfriend, no LLC, and $42.20 in his bank account, and the IRS was knocking on his door. The phone rang, a shrill, panicked sound in the quiet room. I looked at the screen, at the 575 number. He had one call to make. The technician, the one who always fixed his messes. The phone rang again. I smiled, picked up the cold mug of coffee, and let it ring. The 575 area code flashed on my phone screen again, a frantic, pulsing strobe in the dark office. I let it ring, sipping my now stone-cold coffee. It went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it rang again. I picked up. I hit the speaker button. The sound that came through the phone was not Mark's, not the confident, charismatic poet. It was a wet, ragged, gasping sound. Eliza? Oh God, Eliza. Thank God. He was weeping. It was an ugly, thin animal sound. I waited. She's gone, he choked. She's gone, Eliza. She took everything. The money from the account, she took the car. She just left. No note, nothing. Just gone. He was giving a perfect, near verbatim description of what he had done to me. The lack of self-awareness was staggering. It was her, he sobbed, the narrative already forming. It was all her idea, the B&B, the concept. She got in my head. This whole polyamory thing. It was a mistake, Eliza. A terrible, stupid mistake. I was a fool. I was such a fool. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry for how it had turned out. I just want to come home, he whispered. The silence from my end was absolute. It unnerved him. Eliza, he said, his voice sharpening with a new panic. Eliza, I'm in trouble. The IRS, they froze everything. The accounts, the property. It's a mistake, a misunderstanding. They think I'm some kind of criminal. You can fix this. You're the only one who can talk to them. You can fix this, right? Like you always do. Please. I'm begging you. He'd finally said the magic words. Fix it. I'll be in touch, I said. My voice was flat, unfamiliar even to me. I hung up. He called back instantly. I silenced the ringer and sent him a text message. A single line. An address on the industrial side of the river. Not our home. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. It was the address of my new office, the lease I'd signed last week. I got there at 9. The space was magnificent. 5,000 square feet of raw, open floor plan in a converted warehouse. It smelled of fresh industrial-grade paint and new carpet. The only furniture in the entire cavernous room was a cheap folding table and 2 metal folding chairs, which I'd placed directly in the center under a single, harsh fluorescent light. I sat, my back to the door, and waited. At 10:15, the heavy fire door creaked open. His footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. He looked homeless. His expensive linen shirt was stained and wrinkled, hanging off him. He'd lost weight. His skin had a gray, papery look. Eliza? His voice was a thin echo. What is this place? Sit down, Mark. He stumbled into the chair opposite me. He looked around at the vast, empty space, his eyes wide and terrified. He was trying to find the old dynamic, the one where he charmed and I relented. This is a big space. Are you moving the firm? I know I don't deserve it, he started again, rushing, his hands trembling on the table. I know that, but she was toxic. If you can just help me. With the IRS, just clear this one thing up. I'll sign whatever you want. I don't care about the house. I slid a single manila folder across the table. He stopped, mid-plea. He looked at the folder. What is this? Open it. He fumbled with the tab, his fingers clumsy. He pulled out the single sheet of paper. It was the loan application for CHL Wellness Holdings, LLC. My signature, the one he'd copied and pasted, was circled in bright red ink. He didn't speak. He just stopped. The fake tears, the begging, the narrative, it all evaporated. I watched the blood drain from his face. The poet vanished, leaving only the thief. It's not an IRS audit, Mark, I said. My voice was quiet, but the acoustics in the empty room carried every cold syllable. It's a criminal referral, and it wasn't from the IRS. He stared at the paper, his breathing shallow. It was from the bank, I said. The bank I notified about the forgery. He looked up, his eyes black with dawning, sickening comprehension. Eliza, you wouldn't. You'd destroy us. You settled that. I already settled with the bank. They were very cooperative once I showed them the full file, explained how the fraud compromised their entire loan portfolio. I traded my silence for their full cooperation. I own your debt now, Mark. I control the file. I control you. I leaned forward. You wanted to be open, so let's be open. You didn't ghost me. You committed bank fraud. Chloe didn't leave you. She was just the smarter investor. And you didn't want polyamory. You wanted a fund, and I was it. He was shaking his head, a tiny, spastic movement. No, please, Eliza, you can't. You have two options, I said, as if explaining a balance sheet. I slid a second set of documents and a pen across the table. Option 1, you sign that. It's a quitclaim deed. You sign over the E. Tao's property and what's left of your shell company to me, right now, as partial repayment for the $412,000 you stole. He stared at the deed, then at me. Or, I take this folder. I tap the forgery with one finger, and I walk it across the street to the U.S. Attorney's office. I'm sure they'd be very interested in your signature and the wire fraud that followed. Your choice. It was the cold, hard logic he had always despised. It was the technician showing her work. He looked from the forgery to the deed. He was trapped. There was no one to charm, no narrative to spin, just the numbers, just the crime. He grabbed the pen, his hand shaking with a rage so profound it made him clumsy. He scribbled his looping, arrogant signature on the line. It was a jagged, angry mess. He threw the pen down, shoved the papers back at me, and stood. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked away. I listened to his footsteps echo, fading across the vast floor. The heavy fire door slammed shut. The sound, final. I picked up the signed deed. My lawyer would liquidate the Tao's property before the ink was dry. I didn't want the asset. I wanted the closure. Then I picked up the forged loan application. I walked to the corner of the office where a heavy-duty shredder was plugged in. I fed the paper in. The high-pitched whine was the only sound in the empty room. 6 months later. The office was no longer empty. It was chaos. It was my new firm, and it was thriving. The cavernous space was filled with desks, bright young analysts, and the constant hum of servers. The walls were covered in whiteboards, dense with numbers and flowcharts. The air smelled of hot electronics and strong coffee. I was at the head of a glass conference table, leading my new team through a complex fraud case. He's hiding the asset in a life insurance trust, but he was sloppy. He used the same registered agent in Delaware. See? Right there. The glass door to the conference room opened, and Sarah leaned against the frame. I paused, holding up a hand to my team. Let's break for 10 minutes. They filed out, chattering. Sarah walked in, a real relaxed smile on her face. She didn't ask about Mark. She didn't ask about the old house, which I'd also sold. She just said, "Dinner?" I looked down at the spreadsheets on the monitor. For a moment, I felt the old pull, the need to find the answer, to nail the bastard. But then I looked up at Sarah. The tension I had carried in my shoulders for 22 years was gone. I felt its absence, a sudden, surprising lightness. I closed the laptop, and for the first time in what felt like my entire life, I gave a genuine, relaxed smile. "Yes," I said, "I'm free."